spinal taps as well to get to try to get the inoculum in. And I think the important thing to think about here too is, you know, it's too easy to say, okay, this was a period when there wasn't research norms or any of the kind of regulations we've had in place since the mid-'70s. But Cutler's bosses at the Public Health Service knew this was sort of really on the edge. And the quote that I found that just really knocked me off the chair was one from the Surgeon General himself, who said, and this is secondhand, but it was in a letter to Cutler, where one of his colleagues said, the Surgeon General says, well, we couldn't do this in the United States. And that's just a stunning, absolutely stunning acknowledgement of what was going on.
We're going to go to break, but when we come back, upon this discovery in your writing of your study, I want to talk about how this has now become public. We're talking to medical historian Susan Reverby. She's a professor at Wellesley College. She's written 2 books on Tuskegee, the latest examining Tuskegee, the infamous syphilis study and its legacy. And we're going to talk about the Tuskegee experiments, as well as many that have been done around this country over the decades with unwitting, unknowing, unwilling subjects. This is Democracy Now! Back in a minute.
I went down to that St. James Infirmary, and I saw some plasma there. I upped and asked the doctor man, now was the donor dark or fair? The doctor laughed a great big laugh, and he puffed it right in my face. He says, a molecule is a molecule, son, and the darn thing has no race. And that was news, yes, that was news. That was very, very, very special news. 'Cause ever since that day we've had those free and equal blues. You mean you heard that doc declare that the plasma in that test tube there could be white man, black man, yellow man, red?
Josh White, Free and Equal Blues. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We're spending the hour on medical experimentation, the latest explosive story about a study that was done about half a century ago. In 1946-48, American public health doctors deliberately infecting nearly 700 Guatemalans with syphilis and gonorrhea. Susan Reverby is the professor, the medical historian who discovered the story. And Susan Reverby joins us now. She teaches at Wellesley College. Professor Reverby, you made the discovery, and then you actually did a presentation of this at a conference, but there was very little outcry or response.
Well, the best way to explain this is I wrote it up, I finished the research, I wrote it up, I gave it as a paper at the History of Medicine meetings in Rochester, Minnesota last May. But I was on the last day of the last session on a Sunday during the semester. So there were maybe 20 people in the audience, and, you know, my colleagues were pretty horrified. But, you know, historians are, I don't mean to say we're jaded, but people understand that this has happened in the past. We all knew about other kinds of studies. So we had a lively, I'd say, conversation, but, you know, historians don't like run out of the room screaming and call the National Enquirer. It's sort of not what we do. And people asked me what I was going to do with it, and I said I had been asked to write this up for the Journal of Policy History. And they were doing a special issue on human subjects. So I, you know, finished the semester, I wrote the paper up, and I sent it off to the journal. It's going to be published this January in their special issue. But what I also did with this, and I think here's where the difference is between what historians normally do and what I did and was lucky enough to do, frankly, in this situation. While I was working on the Tuskegee book, I had interviewed and then, you know, kept up my relationship with a man named David Sensor. David Sensor is a physician, now retired. He's in his 80s, and he had been the director of the Centers for Disease Control in the late 60s and 70s when the story of Tuskegee had broken. And so I had interviewed him. We had talked about it. We talked a lot about research and government research. And also, you know, I was writing a paper about syphilis. I'm not a physician. I'm a medical historian. And I sent it to him and said, please look at this, make sure the medicine is correct, and tell me what you think. And I wanted you to know about this. So he read it, and he was completely horrified. And he wrote me back immediately. So this might have been late June, early July now. And he said, do you mind if I send this to people at CDC so that they know that this is coming? And I said yes, because it wasn't like I was discovering the cure for cancer and didn't want to share it with anyone until I got to publication. It was important to let them know and for them to think about it. And they read it. They gave it to their leading syphilis expert. They asked me for more material. I sent them my notes, frankly, and then they said, we need to look at this too. And so they went up to Pittsburgh to look at the archives. And when their lead syphilis expert wrote his report up, it corroborated what I had said. So it was like getting the best peer review you can imagine. And then they started to talk about it within CDC. And then it went up the chain of command, I understand, from CDC to the National Institutes of Health. And from there, you know, because it was international, to the State Department, and then eventually to the White House. So all of that, working that through, took about a month and a half, frankly. So I think Douglas's report, the man who went to Pittsburgh, came out in early August, and so it took them a couple of weeks to figure out how to respond to it, and that's what happened. But we should really thank Dr. David Sencer for giving it to CDC. I mean, he had the connections. Obviously, I did not.
We're talking with Professor Susan Reverby. She's a medical historian. She's exposed this latest study done in the 40s in Guatemala. So spinal taps, direct injections of syphilis, gonorrhea. This is now President Obama called the Guatemalan President. The Guatemalan President, Álvaro Colom, has called this a crime against humanity. He wants an international investigation. What do you think of his response, Professor Reverby?
Which Colom's response?
Yes.
Colom's response. Colom's response. I think he's right. I mean, I think this was horrific. I mean, but we're going to have to understand why it was done, and remember that there was an attempt to treat, so that. I mean, I'm not trying to downplay. Please understand this. Anything that went on here, but it was a treatment. In the end, it was supposed to be a treatment study. What we're going to have to look at is the data to try to figure out in each of these cases whether enough penicillin was given to everybody.
How many people died? Is it known in Guatemala how many people died?
We don't know. We don't know. We really don't know. One person for sure we know died from epilepsy during it. Syphilis does not cause epilepsy. Many of the people who were in the state insane asylum already had epilepsy. That's, in fact, why they were in this asylum, which is really horrific. And one of the things the Public Health Service did was to give Dilantin, which is the drug of choice at that time to cure epilepsy, to the institution as part of the quid pro quo for getting in. So I think Colom is right that this was horrific and should be looked into. And frankly, I hope that they can find anyone still, you know, the children or anyone from alive, because these were contagious diseases for the people who weren't totally cured. And looking at the medical records of all these people, the guesstimate at this point from the CDC physician is maybe about a third of these people weren't given totally the right amount of treatment, but we'll have to look into it. We don't know, for example, whether Juan Funes within the Guatemalan Public Health Service then followed people up and gave them the right treatment. None of us know that, and I was only working with what Cutler had left behind. I had looked for more material in the National Archives, which is where all the Public Health Service material is left, and I didn't see anything else. So all we have, because this was unpublished, is what Cutler left behind in these records.
Professor Reverby, you describe three studies as the trinity of unholy medical research. Can you describe what these three studies are? You might start talking about the